Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, and it is, as always, my pleasure to be here, my blessing to be here. And we're currently reading and discussing the book, The Papacy and the Civil Power, a much needed book to be read in this country. And that's why I've taken it upon myself to read it here on Inquisition Update, hopefully to be captured in the archives and available to the listeners on an as-requested basis, and that people would avail themselves both of listening to these recordings and also getting a copy of this book and studying it and researching it for yourself. Now, yesterday at the end of the broadcast, we were right in the middle of a lengthy quote from Alexander of Russia. And to recap a bit, our discussion involved the suppression and extinction of the Jesuits by Pope Clement XIV in 1773, and that all the Roman Catholic nations of Europe sided with the Pope and kicked the Jesuits out of their country. After having run roughshod all over Europe, the Jesuits, insinuating themselves in politics and religion, inciting tumults and conflagrations, assassinations, wars, the Catholic world, believe it or not, had finally had enough, demanded that Pope Clement XIV destroy the Jesuit order. It was a creation of the papacy, and it ought to be destroyed by the papacy and forever sequestered. And that's exactly what Pope Clement XIV did after a lengthy and thorough investigation of the charges levied against the Jesuits. The Jesuits were enemy number one, or so it seemed. And after their suppression, they found the only refuge in the world, Russia, Prussia, as this author admits, and the United States of America. And you would think that after such a violent and widespread upheaval against the Jesuits, enough to even inspire the Pope to suppress and extinguish this order of monks and priests by a papal bull, an infallible papal bull, that these Jesuits would find another occupation. And that when they found refuge, sanctuary from pursuit in Russia and Prussia and the United States, that they would behave themselves. But that's not at all what happened. And here is a quote from Alexander of Russia denouncing these Jesuits, who should have been grateful to have Russia as a refuge, should have been grateful, and they should have been humble, and they should have been peaceable citizens in Russia. But here's what he says. It has been, however, proved that they have not realized the duties imposed on them by gratitude and that humility commanded by the Christian religion. Instead of remaining peaceable inhabitants of a foreign land, Russia, they have endeavored to disturb the Greek religion, that is, the Orthodox Church that found refuge in Russia. He said they have endeavored to disturb the Greek religion, which from time immemorial has been the predominant religion in this country. They began by abusing the confidence they had obtained, and having turned away from our religion young men who had been entrusted to them, and some weak and ignorant women who have been converted to their own church. So they went after the young boys and women to convert them to Roman Catholicism, and eventually raised up persecutorial machinery against the Orthodox Church in Russia. Now he continues, he says, to induce a man to abjure his faith, the faith of his ancestors, to extinguish in him the love of those who profess the same belief, to render him a stranger in his country, to sow tares of animosity among his families, to tear the son from the father and the daughter from the mother, to stir up division among the children of the same church. Is that the voice of the will of God and His Holy Son, Jesus Christ? Quite an indictment, isn't it? This is what the Jesuits were up to. And it says, after such actions, remember this is Alexander, the king of Russia, after such actions, we are no more surprised that these monks are expelled from all countries and nowhere tolerated. Where, in fact, is the state that would tolerate in its bosom those who sow in it hatred and discord? Unquote. Where, in fact, is the state or the nation that would tolerate in its bosom those who sow in it hatred and discord? Certainly, Russia's had a change of heart. The Jesuits are no longer welcome in Russia, where they should have been grateful and peaceable and humble. Instead, they went on the attack against the Orthodox Church, the first great schism of the Roman Catholic Church. In 1054 AD, the Roman Catholic Church had a split right down the middle, the East versus the West. The Roman Church pursued the Orthodox in crusade after crusade, and they finally found refuge and peace in Russia, and it became the state religion of Russia. Well, the Jesuits, having been suppressed and kicked out of Roman Catholic Europe, instead of holding up the peace flag, the white flag, they went into Russia and began attacking the Orthodox Church. Not one thing changed with the Jesuits. Conquest is their first, middle, and last name. And Russia got fed up as well and kicked them out. So that left two refuges in the world for the Jesuits: Prussia and the United States of America. Now, the author continues, he says, the marvelous influence of the Jesuits was not entirely destroyed, even in the Roman Catholic states, although greatly weakened by the suppression of the order, notwithstanding the bull by which they were suppressed was issued ex cathedra, in other words, from the throne of the Pope, and was therefore the official act of an infallible Pope. Never mind that they were suppressed. They went on about their diabolical business. And it says, since their pontifical incorporation by the bull Regimini Militantis Ecclesia, issued by Pope Paul III in 1540, it had so thoroughly permeated all orders of society that it was still visible more or less in every direction. In other words, Jesuitism still existed in every part of society. And it says, by subverting the morality of the gospel and substituting their immoral maxims for religion, and by endeavoring to destroy all the, quote, fundamental laws which form the basis of all states and governments, they brought the encyclopedist into existence, the most conspicuous of them, in fact, as Voltaire, Diderot, Helvetius, Marmontel, St. Lambert, Lamentry, and many others had issued from the Jesuitical colleges or had had Jesuits as their tutors. Now, these were rebellious writers, all educated in the Jesuit schools. Now, they're going after, they're destroying, raising up the French Revolution by these people in order to overthrow the kings who had ousted them in cooperation with Pope Clement XIV and the suppression of the Jesuits. So They're literally destroying their own church in Europe in order to reform it. And it's amazing how they did it. Now it says, and when after the French Revolution it had been demonstrated to the sovereigns of Europe that it was not impossible for the people to attempt the destruction of monarchy and the establishment of republican institutions, and it became necessary for them to counteract and, if possible, to destroy the influence of this sentiment, the reestablishment of the Jesuits was considered by many of them as the most certain and effective means of accomplishing that object. There's the reason for the French Revolution. Republican forms of government had replaced papal monarchies in Europe. And the Jesuits wanted to restore monarchical rule in Europe so that the Pope could once again have control of the kings of the earth. It was Protestantism that led to papal overthrow and the destruction of the monarchical systems of Europe, the monarchical governments of Europe. And governments of, by, and for the people sprang up everywhere. And as we've already learned, the papacy does not like government of, by, and for the people. He, as the vicar of Christ, has the sole authority to govern. And so these monarchical systems had to be restored. And nobody was better qualified to do that than the Jesuit order. And it says, on the part of these sovereigns, the motive was entirely political. But they had no difficulty in enlisting the assistance of the Pope, who had as ardent attachment as any of them to the principles of monarchy, especially to that part of the Jesuit constitution which teaches implicit and unquestioning obedience to superiors. Pope Pius VII then was Pope, and it says the complications of which had become involved with the complication in which he had become involved with Napoleon I, who had re-annexed the states of the Church, that is, the Papal States, to the Empire of France, declared himself King of Italy, and forbidden the Pope to hold communication with any church in France, made it necessary for him to resort to some measure of relief against the threatened destruction of his papal authority. The Pope was losing all of his power. He was desperate. He was losing the Papal States. He lost Italy. He lost all of Europe. Really, the Bible tells us of this. It speaks of a mortal wound, doesn't it? This is it. The papacy was nearly destroyed and, for all intents and purposes, had received a mortal wound. Stripped of his temporal power, he had no more power to command the kings of the earth and persecute God's people. But he had one hope, and he placed all that hope in the Jesuit order to restore his temporal power, not only in Europe, but in Russia, in Prussia, and the United States of America. Now it says the Jesuits seemed to him to be the most fit auxiliaries in the work of regaining power, inasmuch as the superiority of a single individual as the governing authority over the inferior classes of the people constituted the central idea of their system. And he accordingly reestablished the order in 1814 after they had been under the papal ban for 37 years. 37 years they had been suppressed by a bull, an infallible bull, by Pope Clement XIV. But the papacy had lost so much power and influence that the Pope found it necessary to reestablish the Jesuit order, because they were the only hope he had of regaining his kingly scepter. Now it says, besides the political motive which influenced the sovereigns who favored their restoration, he had also a religious one, which was to counteract the influence of Protestantism, then rapidly gaining ground in all the states of Christendom. That's right, Catholicism was being overpowered by the truth, by Protestantism, Bible Christianity. The papacy cannot survive under papal influence, or under Protestant influence, because Protestant influence overthrows the power of the Pope and replaces it with the power of Christ and His Holy Spirit. Now it says, by his memorable bull for the purpose, Solicitudo Omnium, he referred to the abundant fruits, the quote-unquote abundant fruits, which had been produced in Russia and Sicily by the workings of the Jesuit order, and declared that in the then dangerous condition of, quote, the Christian Republic, and you may read that the Catholic Republic, it would be a great crime, he said, if he did not reestablish it. That is, the Jesuit order and the Christian Republic. If, he said, he placed the bark of Peter, tossed and assailed by continual storms, we refuse to employ the vigorous and experienced rowers, that he's speaking of the Jesuits here, he likens them to vigorous and experienced rowers who volunteer their services in order to break the waves of the sea which threatens every moment shipwreck and death. So he's virtually attributing the survival of the papacy, the bark of Peter, to the vigorous and experienced rowers of the Jesuits. That's how important the Jesuits were to the papal revival, the healing of that seemingly mortal wound. And he says, therefore, with an utter disregard of the character and authority of Clement XIV, he abrogated his, what he called, apostolic letters. In other words, they don't refer to it as a bull anymore. They refer to it merely as apostolic letters of suppression. And he restored the society, that is the Jesuit order, to all of its powers, declared that it should be consolidated more and more to render it stronger, counseled its members to exactly observe the rule prescribed by their founder, Ignatius Loyola, and announced that notwithstanding that all Clement, the infallible Pope, had said and done, it would henceforth be considered an act of audacious temerity for anyone to oppose his infallible decree, and that should anyone take upon him to attempt it, let him know, said he, that he will thereby incur the indignation of Almighty God and of the holy apostles Peter and Paul. That is, that curse of God would rest upon whomsoever should believe what his predecessor, Clement XIV, had said about the immoral maxims and the dangerous teachings of the Jesuits, or should dare to obey his pontifical brief, or his bull, rather. So the threat has gone out. The Jesuits are back. I am the infallible Pope. Clement XIV was wrong. He was not infallible. And if anybody questions my decision, or if anybody attacks the Jesuits and their godless maxims, they will incur the wrath of Almighty God, the apostles, and the Pope. So the Pope is desperate. He must have these Jesuits back. And he's willing to threaten anybody who raises a protest about it. Remember, all of Europe kicked out the Jesuits. It's the Pope against all of Europe and Russia. And he says, may the wrath of God descend upon anybody who tries to reverse my decision. I am God, the vicar of God on earth. And so the Jesuits were reinstated in 1814. And he continues, he says, in such a contest of authority, the last pope always has the advantage. He can make his pontifical power as one of the chief elements of his infallibility more immediate and sensibly felt. This act of restoration was done with cool audacity and with the especial object of arresting the progress of the modern and advancing nations. Why were they modern and advancing? Because they had thrown off the papal yoke. They had put upon themselves the liberty of Christ. They read the Bible. They took back all the land that had been given to the Roman Catholic Church and put it back into productive use for their nations and for their people. And all of a sudden, there was wealth and affluence. They were sending their kids to college. They were learning to read. And the more they learned to read, the more they read the Bible. And the more they read the Bible, the more liberty they had. And the farther down the road the papacy seemed as a has-been. An addition to the trash bin of history. But they're going to overthrow these modern, Protestant, and liberal and advancing nations. And it said it should excite no surprise, therefore, that the Jesuits, when 17 years afterwards, Gregory XVI became Pope, availed themselves of their renewed strength and partially revived popularity in the Roman Catholic states to convert the papacy into a machine for the advancement of their ambitious projects. So here we see, topsy-turvy, the Jesuits not only come back, but they get control of the papacy. And you can just hear the rationale. You suppressed us, you popes, in 1773, and here we're not 37 years later, and you're demanding as a matter of your own survival that we be reestablished. Now we're going to be in control. We're going to foist this papacy to the top, to the world's supreme ruler, and we're not going to tolerate any more interference from the papacy. We're going to put the Pope of our choosing in the throne of the earth. And they got control of the papacy, and they've been in control of the papacy ever since. You see, the papacy tended at times to disrupt its own progress. And the Jesuits, being single-minded in their goal of making the Pope the supreme and sovereign ruler of every man, woman, and child on the planet, have simply had too much interference from the popes themselves. So they're not only at war against Protestantism and all the other schisms, the Orthodox Church, but they're against their own popes when their popes turn away from their goal of world conquest. Now we've got the Jesuits in control of the papacy. It's been that way ever since. And now the world is their oyster. And we'll make this abundantly clear, or rather R.W. Thompson will make it abundantly clear when we come back from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. We're continuing where we left off before the break in the book, The Papacy and the Civil Power by R.W. Thompson. The last sentence that said, "It should excite no surprise, therefore, that the Jesuits, when 17 years afterward Gregory XVI became Pope, availed themselves of the renewed strength and partially revived popularity in the Roman Catholic states to convert the papacy into a machine for the advancement of their ambitious projects." They let the Pope know that they were in charge, that they were going to control the papacy, and was going to use the papacy to help them promote their own projects, the Jesuits' own projects. And I want to interject at this time something that I learned from Bill Hughes's book, The Secret Terrorists, that it was at this time that the Jesuits got together with all the monarchs of Europe and the papacy and ordered a series of meetings. And out of those meetings came about the creation of the Leopold Society and the financing of mass Roman Catholic immigration to the United States of America to help Catholicize America. Why? Because the papacy and the Jesuits were going to use the New World to reestablish the Pope's temporal power all over the world to create the New World Order. The New World was going to help establish the papacy's New World Order. And we're in the end game of that now. So we're talking about this most momentous period of time, from the time of the suppression of the Jesuits until the current date on the calendar. The papacy has been going in one direction, to Catholicize the United States and to use the massive financial and military colossus of this once Protestant land to conquer the rest of the world for the papacy. You ever wonder why the United States is called the world's police force? Why its military have bases in every country in the world? Why it meddles in the foreign affairs of every nation on the planet? Because America is the seat of papal authority. It is the only nation on the earth that did not kick out the Jesuits with supreme prejudice. The United States has been a haven for the Jesuit order, and they've gotten control of our government and have used it without raising the suspicion of the American people, simply because we were not knowledgeable of what they had done in Europe and never suspected them. Well, now it's time to open our eyes and recall this European history that shows the diabolical nature of the Jesuit order and its power. The power to restore the papacy and then to take it over and then to use this country, a Protestant nation, to conquer the rest of the world for the Pope. Now it says, under such favorable auspices, they were soon enabled to get control and to shape the whole policy of the papal court. After their suppression, they were reestablished 37 years later, and the first thing they did was they got control of the papal court. That is, the Pope and his cardinals and bishops. They subdued them all. And it says, Gregory XVI, yielding to their influence as well as his own inclination, became a despot and the supporter of despotism in its most odious and oppressive forms. The severity of his pontifical government soon excited the people of Europe to assert their independence, and the people of Italy, to assert their independence. They got so aggressive that Italy had been fed up. The very nation in which the papacy exists got fed up and threw off the papal yoke. And it says, and then to inaugurate an effort to deprive him, the Pope, of his temporal crown and to defend himself against them, he threw himself completely into the arms of the Ultramontane or Jesuit party. I want you to notice that the author uses Ultramontanism as synonymous with Jesuitism. Extreme right-wing Council of Trent Roman Catholicism, the extreme traditionalist form of Roman Catholicism, oppressive monarchy, top-down government, crackdown, top-down government. Italy rebelled. The Pope's own nation rebelled against him, just as all of Europe did. And it says, as the chief object of this party was to check the popular progress toward freedom in the Papal States, as well as elsewhere, the Pope soon identified himself with such measures and principles as rendered him extremely odious to a large part of his Roman Catholic subjects who were tired of papal bondage. And this feeling against him was doubtless increased on account of his supposed want of private virtue. In other words, he was a scoundrel. And it says, as were most popes, by the way, if you've been a regular listener to Inquisition Update and heard the reading of The Vicars of Christ, The Dark Side of the Papacy by Peter de Rosa, the papacy is despicable. And I won't sum it all up, but the incestuous, sexual perversion and depravity par excellence. I mean, the Roman Catholic papacy is despicable. in human terms, the papacy is despicable, and the problem still exists today. The papacy has been so morally bankrupt that it now has to defend its priests, its common parish priests, for the same crimes that the papacy have committed nearly ever since the beginning of the Roman Catholic Church. Sodomy, pedophilia, sexual perversion, sexual depravity, all kinds of crime. The priesthood is just a mirror image of the papacy. And this pope was no exception. And it says, whatever was the cause of his unpopularity, however, he not only realized it, but had sagacity enough to know that the corruption prevailing at Rome before the eyes of the people would, if he lost his temporal power, cause him to be driven away from the city and lead in all probability to excesses similar to those that had attended the French Revolution. For at Rome, as well as in France, the people had witnessed so much impiety that they were driven almost to the conviction that religion was a mere disguise, worn for selfish and iniquitous purposes. And he also knew that the habitual intolerance of the papacy and its despotic management of civil affairs would excite the enraged population to deal harshly with him and his ecclesiastical advisers, and that he would not be likely to find a safe or desirable asylum among the similarly enraged populations of any of the Roman Catholic states. And it was on this account that his attention was directed toward the United States. And the Pope was excited in his mind that the tolerance of our Protestant institutions would enable him, through the agency of his Jesuit allies, to build up a papal party here in America sufficiently strong and powerful to regain the authority which the papacy was destined to lose among the Roman Catholic populations of Europe. Did you get that? That he's going to use Protestant America as a base to restore his temporal power that had been stripped from him by the Roman Catholic nations of Europe. What is the likelihood of that happening? Well, that's exactly what has happened. And it says the thought was credible enough to him as a politician, but it was one against which the people of this country should not be slow to protest whenever they are informed of its existence in the papal mind and of any attempt to effectuate such an object. In other words, this should have awakened the American people, but it didn't. And it says, apart from the kind of service which Pope Gregory XVI expected of the Jesuits, it is exceedingly difficult to tell why they had been suffered to acquire such unbounded influence as they possess over all the affairs of the papacy, and why they are considered so necessary to the prosperity of the Roman Catholic Church. They call their society a religious association, but it's scarcely entitled to that designation. The Roman Catholic Church existed until near the middle of the 16th century without the Jesuits. 18 of its ecumenical councils had been held before the formation of the Jesuits. It says, by these, commencing with the Council of Nice in 325 A.D. and ending with the Fifth Lateran Council in 1512, the religious faith of the Roman Catholic Church was well established. The bishops who composed these councils needed no aid from Ignatius Loyola and his followers to take care of the affairs of the Church, either to declare its doctrines or to regulate its discipline. The Society of Jesus, therefore, that is the Jesuit order, when it was established by Pope Paul III, not only did not do anything or add or to improve the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church, but like all others who belonged to the Church, its members professed no other religion than that already established by the ecumenical councils. Its organization was entirely outside the church. Now, this is important. As a religious order, it had no influence whatsoever on the doctrines of the church. The church itself didn't change at all with the creation of the Jesuit order. Therefore, their mission, as stated in their oath, as outlined in their constitutions, is simply world conquest. That's why they don't affect the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. They're a militia. They operate outside of the church. And it says, wherefore then the necessity of establishing this, the most secret society in the world, when the popes at all times have declared that God's curse is resting upon all secret societies. Hypocrisy of hypocrisies. The papacy has denounced secret societies as being from Satan and then turn right around and create the most powerful, the most demoniacal, the most megamaniacal organization, secret society on the planet, the Jesuit order. And I'll just add, a secret society that has infiltrated and gained control of all the other secret societies, including Freemasonry, was once believed to be a Protestant organization. It's now a Jesuitical organization for the purpose of raising one man to world sovereignty and making a global universal religion. Now, the author continues, he says, manifestly the object was to build up an association capable of exercising external power, not necessary to religion, but as the means of training and educating those who were brought under its influence by means of schools and the confessional, to that massive obedience upon which the papacy is founded. Pope Paul III avows as much in his bull establishing the order. He says that it is designed, quote, expressly for the instruction of boys and other ignorant people in Christianity, and above all, for the spiritual consolation of the faithful in Christ by hearing confessions. So we have the two main objectives of the papacy: education of young boys and taking confessions of the elite of the world. They raise up an army indoctrinated in their maxims from little boys to men. They put them in the most powerful positions in government, and then they become their confessors. And that's how they control the world. Now, and as if the church did not already possess the means of giving instruction and hearing confessions, he empowers, quote, some of the Jesuits, meaning Loyola and his crew, to draw up such constitutions as they shall judge necessary. In other words, a constitution that's completely independent of the church. And that's what you'll find when you research the Constitution of the Jesuits. It's not a religious document. It is a military document declaring war on Protestantism and any other opposition that might raise its ugly head against the papacy and their quest for world domination. Now it says they have no power to add or to take from any of the articles of faith. Their religion is prescribed by the church. Their constitution is their own, and to it alone must we look for the nature and the character of their organization. If you want to know anything about the Jesuit order, you have to enlist the help of reading their oath and reading their constitution. Now, the author's going to tell us a bit about that. He said, now let any reader take the pains to examine the provisions of the Constitution of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, and he will not find one single word in it essential to religious faith. Nothing to show what Christ or his apostles or the fathers taught in reference to any of the fundamental doctrines of Christianity. On the other hand, he will find provisions for the initiation of novices, for scholars, coadjutors, the professed, provincials, rectors, superiors, and administrators, and duties of each being minutely defined. Much pertains to the working of the machinery of the Jesuit order, but there are certain principles running through the whole organization which sufficiently show how little claim it has to be known as a religious society. Each member is required to take a vow that he will understand, quote, all things according to the constitution of the society, unquote, not the teachings of the church, but the constitution of the society, that he will regard the Jesuit general of the society as, quote, holding the place of God, unquote, that he will go wherever, quote, the Pope pro tempore chooses to send him. In other words, they call the Jesuit general the Pope pro tempore, and he will unquestioningly go wherever the Jesuit general sends him, that he will consider the Jesuit general as, quote, absolute master of persons and things, unquote, that, quote, there should be no will, no opinion, but that of the generals, unquote, and no opposing, no contradicting, no showing an opinion, in any case, opposed to the Jesuit general, that he must regard the superior general of the Jesuit order as Christ the Lord, and must strive to acquire perfect resignation and denial of his own will and judgment, and all things conforming his will and judgment to that which the superior, the Jesuit general, wills and judges, and that this virtue of obedience must be perfect in every point, in execution, in will, in intellect, doing what is enjoined with all celerity, spiritual joy, and perseverance, persuading oneself that everything is just, suppressing every repugnant thought and judgment of one's own in a certain obedience, and let everyone persuade himself that he who lives under the obedience should be moved and directed under divine providence by his superior, just as if he were a corpse, which allows itself to be moved and led in any direction, that no earthly authority can involve an obligation to commit sin, mortal or venial, against us, unless the superior command it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, or in virtue of holy obedience, and that each member must concentrate all his desires and affections upon the society of Jesus, even to the extent of putting away all strong affections for his parents, unquote. So there you have it. In a nutshell, a Jesuit priest must become, as it were, a zombie, without thought, without will of his own, detached from parents, siblings, nations, and all earthly ties, so that he may serve the Jesuit general at his whim, as if he were an extension of the Jesuit general's arm, that he would, without consideration, obey the Jesuit general. A zombie, a cadaver that can be moved around all over the world at the will of the Jesuit general to do whatever is commanded him without resistance, without question. Manchurian candidates. I read an anecdote one time of how the Jesuit general called one of his subjects, one of his Jesuit priests, into his office for consultation. And the priest walked into the superior general's office and sat down in the chair in front of his desk. And the superior general just simply said, "Put the chair on your head." meaning he wasn't given the command to sit down. He simply took and sat in the chair of his own will without permission. And there the Jesuit priest stood hour after hour after hour with that chair upon his head, the chair upon which he voluntarily and without permission sat in, now became the resting place for the chair for the rest of the afternoon. The Jesuit general expects a Jesuit priest to be like a robot, like a dead man walking. And that's how they are so effective in the world. They are singleness of mind. Every Jesuit priest is required to have the mind of the Jesuit general, to follow instructions without deviation, to do not one whit more than he's instructed to do, and to do it precisely as he is instructed to do, even if it means his own life. And they believe that's a service to God, and they obey the Pope, as the Black Pope, as if he were God. And that's how they achieved salvation in their diabolical order. No wonder they were kicked out of every nation on the planet except the United States of America. We just don't get it. Now, it is stated by McLean in a note to Mosheim's ecclesiastical history that when Ignatius Loyola first laid before Pope Paul III the plan for the organization of his society and desired his approval of it, there was a provision which restricted somewhat the promised obedience to the Pope. This having given rise to objection, it was so changed as to bind the order, quote, by a solemn vow of implicit, blind, and unlimited submission and obedience to the Roman pontiff, unquote, which removed every obstacle. And with that out of the way, the Jesuits were off and running. And it says, herein lies the true secret of the papal attachment to this mysterious organization. It accounts for its reestablishment during the present century by Pope Pius VII and the readiness with which Pope Gregory XVI subsequently permitted the Jesuits to direct his pontificate. They were the vigorous and experienced rowers, and in consideration for the privilege of shaping the policy of the papacy, they were always ready to obey the papal commands, although in doing so they should be required to put themselves in secret and insidious conflict with all existing governments of the world, including ours, the United States of America. We'll continue tomorrow on the broadcast. Thanks for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter The Left Behind Paradigm of Future Events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.